They stole the job I loved, dragged my name through the dirt, and thought I'd stay quiet. But I still had the one thing they couldn't buy, evidence. You don't usually hear the moment your life starts to unravel. It's more of a shift in temperature, a small silence where a familiar voice should be, the sting of a coffee cup that's not where it's supposed to be. For me, it started on a Tuesday. Nothing glamorous about it. I walked into DeltaStride Innovations, our shining tower of glass and metal in downtown Portland, and the first thing I noticed was that Chloe didn't greet me. For 10 years, that woman never missed a "morning, Martin," or a perfectly timed smile as she placed my black coffee, no cream, no sugar, right at the edge of my desk. But that morning, she kept her eyes glued to a stack of folders. Didn't glance up. Didn't speak. I paused just long enough to wonder what I'd done. The silence followed me down the corridor. I'd been with DeltaStride since it was 30 people in a rented garage with a half-broken espresso machine and no air conditioning. I'd written the first compliance spreadsheet by hand. I watched us go public. I stayed late, I played clean, and I believed, stupidly, that kind of loyalty meant something. Gerald Moore, our old CFO, had once called me the company's conscience. He used to laugh over beers and say, "They can charm the interns and bluff the board, but they'll never slip past you." He was a decent man. Tired, overworked, but ethical to his bones. Then came the stroke. 2 months of mounting pressure from the board. 2 months of quiet meetings behind closed doors. He handed in his retirement, packed his boxes, and left through the back exit. Just like that. The next week, Trent Holloway appeared. Young. Polished. Fresh from some East Coast finance firm with a 6-figure smile and the kind of charisma that made people nod even when they didn't understand what he'd just said. A bold new direction, they said. Data-driven growth, they said. The board loved him. But my gut? My gut said the numbers didn't match the smile. The red flags came fast. I got removed from weekly leadership syncs. Then, a folder I'd accessed for years suddenly gave me a "permission denied" error. I asked IT. They said it was an update, standard protocol. Sure. I looked closer. Some vendor payments didn't line up. Contracts logged before signatures. Revenue recognized before deliverables. A curious pattern of large transfers, millions, jumping between shell subsidiaries with no clear documentation. Not illegal yet, but heading there fast. I flagged it. Gently at first. Brought it up in a finance meeting. Trent smiled, that easy politician's grin. "Martin, I get it," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You've been here a long time. But the board brought me in to modernize. You're still looking at the game like it's 2010. Trust the new process." "Trent," I said carefully, "I'm just looking at the numbers." "And I'm looking at the future," he replied, eyes flat now. Smile gone. I left the meeting uneasy. That night, I stayed late. Pulled a copy of last quarter's report, cross-referenced it against the real-time entries in our enterprise system. Something stunk. The same contract had been booked in 2 separate quarters, inflating the growth rate by 14%. Either someone didn't understand basic accounting, or they were hoping I didn't notice. The next morning, my login to the core ledger system was revoked. No notice. No explanation. And then the email came. Subject, HR meeting request, 10:30 a.m. I stared at it. The tone was too polite. Too smooth. It didn't ask if I was free, it told me where to be. I already knew. When I stepped into the conference room, Trent was already there, seated next to Paula from HR, who kept her eyes on a manila folder in front of her like it might explode. "Martin," Trent said, folding his hands, "we appreciate everything you've done for DeltaStride. But the company's entering a new phase, and we're realigning key positions. Effective today, your role has been eliminated." Just like that. No warning. No room to speak. I looked at Paula. She slid the folder across the table. Inside you'll find details about your severance, 6 months' salary, continuation of benefits, and a non-disclosure agreement. Trent leaned back, relaxed now that the knife had been driven in. We trust you'll be discreet. For the sake of team morale. I opened the folder. Skimmed. The NDA was thick, deliberately thick. I wasn't just being let go. I was being silenced. Take your time, Paula said quickly. No need to decide now. Oh, I won't, I said. Not without a lawyer. For the first time, Trent flinched. 15 minutes later, I was escorted to my desk by a security guard I'd once helped move apartments. No eye contact. No goodbye. I packed my things in a company-branded cardboard box. My daughter's photo in its cracked ceramic frame. A plaque from a long-forgotten award ceremony. A fountain pen Gerald had given me on our 5th year as a public company. Then I saw it. My coffee mug. The one with the little drawing my daughter made in 3rd grade. The security guy reached for it, trying to shove it between files. It slipped. Hit the box hard. The crack ran right through her smile. Damn it, I muttered. Chloe was watching from across the floor. She hesitated, walked over. Her face was pale. I'm sorry, she whispered. This isn't right. I didn't blame her. Not her fault. Not directly. I nodded. Take care of yourself. She turned away before I could finish the sentence. Shoulders tense. Eyes shining. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the mirror doors. The suit was the same. The tie, the shoes. But the man in the glass. He was done playing nice. They thought they'd buried me. But I knew where the bodies were hidden. And I'd made copies. By the time I got home, the box was starting to tear at the corners. I set it down on the kitchen counter like it was something rotting. Linda turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. She saw the box, then my face. They did it, she said quietly. I nodded. Effective immediately. 6 months severance. NDA the size of a phone book. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. I hadn't realized how tense my shoulders were until I felt her hands. They're scared, she said. That's why they rushed it. They know you know something. Maybe, I said. But they're holding all the cards. She pulled away, already reaching for her phone. No, they're not. I'm calling Alex. I didn't protest. Her brother and I weren't particularly close, we had our usual polite, brother-in-law kind of relationship, but I respected him. Alex was sharp. Analytical. The kind of guy who didn't speak unless it mattered. And more importantly, he worked enforcement at the SEC. Linda explained everything while I poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I could hear Alex on the other end, calm, focused, asking the right questions. When she handed me the phone, he didn't waste time. You have documentation, he asked. All of it, I said. Revenue inflation, phantom transfers, double-booked contracts. It's bigger than just creative accounting. Do not sign anything until you've spoken to a lawyer who specializes in whistleblower cases, he said. I'll send a name. Trust her. That's how I ended up sitting across from Rachel Conway the next day in a quiet corner office that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and fearlessness. She was in her 40s, wore no jewelry, and spoke in a tone that made you want to take notes even when she was asking about your coffee preference. After reviewing the NDA, she pushed it aside with one manicured finger. This is a muzzle, she said flatly. If you sign it, you're effectively waiving your rights to report criminal misconduct. Even to the SEC? I asked. Especially to the SEC. The language is aggressive. They knew exactly what you saw. That's why they're paying you more than they need to. I exhaled slowly, feeling the heat build at the base of my neck. You have options, she continued. But make no mistake, if you choose to fight, it will be a fight. They'll try to destroy your reputation. They'll call you bitter, incompetent, a disgruntled relic who couldn't keep up. I thought about Chloe, the look on her face when I left. The tension in her hands. The way she couldn't even meet my eyes. I nodded. Let them try. That night, the air in the city was colder than usual for October. Fog clung to the street lamps like smoke. I had just left Rachel's office and was cutting through the parking garage toward my car when I noticed the SUV. It was parked far from any other vehicle. Black. Windows tinted beyond legal. No plates. I slowed my walk, my instincts suddenly loud in my ears. As I drew closer, the engine purred to life. The SUV pulled out smoothly, no hurry, no screeching tires, just a slow, deliberate turn and exit. I froze for a beat, tracking its tail lights until they vanished around the corner. Then I saw it. A white envelope tucked neatly under my windshield wiper. My pulse kicked. I looked around, nobody. I reached for it, half expecting it to explode. Inside was a folded printout of an email I'd sent Trent 2 weeks ago, the one where I first raised concerns about the Q2 numbers. Across the bottom, typed in a different font, was a single sentence. You're not the only one who sees the numbers. I stood there for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in my fingers. Not the only one. But was it a warning? An offer? A threat? When I got home, I didn't tell Linda. Not yet. I needed to know more first. I logged in remotely to check the parking garage cameras. The feed for that day, specifically the last 2 hours, was gone. Deleted. Not corrupted. Not unavailable. Just cleanly, surgically removed. Whoever they weren't sloppy. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts were knots. Whoever dropped that envelope had access, physical or digital, to my records. They knew where I was. What I'd sent. When. That wasn't just someone inside the company. That was someone close. The next morning, I woke to a ping on my burner email. One of the old IT guys had helped me set it up years ago for, just-in-case, scenarios. No sender name. Just a message. Brian's been watching you since before Trent arrived. Be careful. It was signed only with a single initial, C. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Brian. Head of Internal Audit. Quiet, detail-oriented, always seemed like he was one coffee short of a heart attack. I'd always assumed he was harmless. But he reported directly to the CFO. And if he'd been watching me before Trent even showed up, that changed the game. I ran a search through my backup logs, files I'd copied over the past year. Sure enough, I found old logs showing repeated access from Brian's credentials to folders that had nothing to do with his scope. Files I'd been working on. Reports I hadn't even finalized. He had been inside my numbers. Tracking my work. Planting seeds. I sat back, breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a coincidence. They'd been preparing this purge for a while, before Trent even arrived, before Gerald retired. I'd been targeted, not sidelined. And now they were trying to erase me cleanly. But I had already copied the files. More importantly, I still had the original audit logs. They were counting on me folding. On me taking the check and disappearing. But I don't vanish. I investigate. And I was done staying quiet. People assume betrayal comes with raised voices or slammed doors. In reality, it comes as a perfectly worded email. It comes with polite HR smiles and the offer of hush money dressed in HR legalese. And sometimes, it comes with your name missing from a meeting invite you built the agenda for. But now, I wasn't waiting for them to play anymore. It was my move. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with two laptops open, one company issued, still operational through a backdoor I hadn't disclosed when I helped design the internal finance architecture, and the other, my own system, running on a secure VPN, logging every move. I took a file, a legitimate quarterly financial report, and inserted a subtle, deliberate error. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough that any competent auditor with access, and motive, would correct it. A phantom $62,380 allocated to consulting services, on a vendor who hadn't worked with us in months. A trained eye would catch it. An untrained one would miss it. And a desperate one would erase it immediately. I left the file where Brian would find it. A folder he'd accessed repeatedly over the past few months, always when no one was looking. Then I waited. The next morning, I opened the same file again. The consulting expense had vanished. The line item had been cleaned, replaced with a vague reclassification adjustment. Nothing flagged in the metadata, but I had my logs. I had the before and after. Timestamps. IP addresses. Credential trail. Brian took the bait. He had no idea I'd watched him do it in real time from a shadow copy of the server. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but clarity. For the first time in weeks, the fog was gone. I wasn't the one being hunted anymore. I was hunting back. 2 days later, I met Miles in the corner of a dive bar in North Portland. He looked worse than I remembered, thinner, his hair longer, circles under his eyes like bruises from staying quiet too long. We kept it simple. 2 beers, no names. You weren't paranoid, he said after the first sip. I wasn't sure, I replied. Not until Brian bit. Miles looked around, then leaned in. He's been Trent's guy since day one. People think he reports to legal, but really? He only reports to Trent. He's the one who flagged you months ago. For what? For knowing too much, Miles said flatly. I clenched my jaw. Figures. They've got a team cleaning old files. Pulling logs, changing author stamps, even modifying audit trails. You left fingerprints everywhere, and now they're trying to bleach them off. What about you? I asked. Are you on anything I worked on? He nodded. They reassigned your entire portfolio. No explanations. I've been asked to align methodologies, which is code for make the lies look uniform. I slid him a small thumb drive. My copies. Full archive of Q1 and Q2 anomalies. Keep it somewhere offline. Miles didn't take it immediately. He stared at it like it was a live grenade. You're really doing this, he said quietly. I already did. The next morning, my phone rang. Not from an unknown number this time. It was Trent. No greetings. No preamble. I hear you've been having meetings, he said, voice clipped and cold. Not wise. I let the silence stretch. He continued, his tone hardening. You're still under NDA until you formally reject the package. If you disclose confidential information, we will pursue legal action. I almost laughed. You're threatening me with a contract I never signed. I said. Interesting legal theory. I suggest you tread carefully, Martin, he said, all traces of civility gone. This could end peacefully. You're right, I said, voice level. It could. Then I hung up. I didn't have to wonder how he knew. Brian probably tapped into employee ID badge logs or phone records. Hell, maybe even Miles was being watched. It didn't matter. I'd expected him to call. But I hadn't expected the next move to come so fast. That afternoon, I received an invitation to a meeting, not from HR, but from Susan Adler, the company's general counsel. A name that didn't appear unless they needed to draw a very specific legal line. We met at a quiet law office rented by the company for private transitions. Trent was already there, sitting across the conference table like a man holding 4 aces and bluffing a 5th. Susan smiled with professional warmth. "Martin, thank you for coming. We wanted to revisit your separation terms." I said nothing. Trent spoke next. "We understand there might have been misunderstandings. Perhaps tension. We'd like to increase the severance to 12 months, full benefits." I looked at the folder they slid across the table. "And the catch?" I asked. Susan didn't flinch. "We'd ask you to sign a formal statement affirming that you observed no unethical or unlawful conduct during your tenure. A standard clarification." My laugh was sharp. "You want me to lie in writing?" "No," Trent said. "We want clarity. And closure." I pushed the folder back across the table without touching it. "This conversation's over." The fallout was immediate. The next day, internal Slack channels lit up with whispers. The company blog posted an unsigned piece about staff transitions, and how certain legacy personnel had struggled to adapt to DeltaStride's innovative new direction. I wasn't named, but it didn't matter. I was the legacy. They accused me of clinging to obsolete systems, of resisting automation, of reporting inconsistencies based on outdated interpretations. A few blogs picked it up. Minor chatter. Enough to muddy the waters. Enough to make me look like a bitter old man who couldn't keep up. But I was ready. I scanned the latest activity logs from the ghost server I'd mirrored. Brian's credentials had been used again last night. Another audit trail adjusted. Another file overwritten. They were doubling down. And then, another message came through my encrypted email. Just a single sentence from Chloe. "They moved me to internal logistics. No computer access. No questions allowed." I read the line 3 times. She was being buried. Quietly pushed to the edge of the company, away from terminals and terminals of truth. I sent back one word, safe. No reply. That night, I backed up everything again. 2 drives. One hidden at home. The other going in a safety deposit box under Linda's name. Because this wasn't just about firing me anymore. This was about erasing me. But I don't erase easily. And I don't play fair when I know the rules were rigged. The moment I told Alex what had happened with Trent and Susan, the 12-month offer, the gag clause, the smear campaign, his voice on the other end of the phone went flat and clinical. That was his dangerous mode. I could picture him, standing by his office window at the SEC, jaw clenched, eyes scanning a whiteboard full of cross-references and timelines. "We're going deeper," he said. Much deeper. It wasn't just about DeltaStride anymore. It was about who inside the system allowed this to go on, and how long it had been rotting before I smelled the smoke. 2 days later, he called again. His tone was different. Not angry. Not cautious. Disturbed. I pulled more historical filings, digging into reporting patterns and intersubsidiary movements, he said. "Martin, the manipulation didn't start with Trent." I froze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the financial engineering began at least 6 months before he was hired." The room seemed to tilt. "That would have been under Gerald," I said. "I know." Silence stretched between us like wire. "He was under pressure," I added. "The board. The investors. But no. He wouldn't." "I didn't want to believe it either," Alex admitted. "But the signs are there. Gerald may not have fabricated the numbers himself, but he signed off on the projections. He had to have known. The betrayal landed like a slow, cold blade. Gerald Moore had mentored me. Defended me in meetings. Shared cigars on the roof after late nights crunching Q4. The man who once said, "Numbers never lie, people do." Had he lied too? I ended the call and stared at my desk. That night, I couldn't rest. I kept seeing Gerald in my mind, slumped over spreadsheets, hands shaking, voice cracking during our last audit committee meeting. He'd looked tired, yes, but defeated. I hadn't seen it then. Maybe I didn't want to. I called him the next morning. He didn't answer. I called again. Left a message. Then a third time. Hours later, I got a reply. One word. Fine. We met at a little coffee house outside Lake Oswego. Neutral ground. Gerald was already there, seated in the back, facing the door. He looked older. Not just older, shrunken. Like someone had drained the air out of him. He didn't stand when I approached. Just gestured to the seat across from him. "No pleasantries," he said quietly. "You tell me," I replied. He nodded, as if he'd expected it. "I know why you're here," he said. "I want the truth," I said. "That's it." Gerald looked past me, out the window, watching a young couple walk by, holding hands. "You think I was the first domino," he said. But I wasn't. He reached into a leather folder and pulled out a worn envelope. From it, he unfolded several pages, faxed documents, printed spreadsheets, and on top, a single handwritten note. My handwriting. "This," he said, tapping the top sheet, "was your first memo on revenue discrepancies. You sent it to me, October last year. You probably don't even remember." "I remember," I said. "You said you were looking into it." "I did," he said. And then I got cornered. He pulled another page from the folder, a dated report stamped confidential, board eyes only. My eyes scanned the first paragraph. It was a directive. Mandated adjustments to quarterly forecasting metrics. Language so sterile it could have been a product brochure. But I knew the code: inflate, defer expenses, smooth out volatility. Lie by omission. "They told me it was temporary," Gerald said, voice dry. "That the market just needed confidence. That we'd normalize the metrics once the acquisition window passed. And you went along with it." "I filed a report to the SEC," he said, sliding another sheet across the table. Anonymous tip. Buried in the system. No response. Then I got a letter from the board's legal counsel. I read the top line. "Any further defamation against Delta Stride leadership will result in personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty." "They threatened to ruin me," Gerald said. 28 years of spotless record. Gone. Just like that. I looked up at him, heart thudding. "You told no one?" "I left breadcrumbs," he said, lifting the original memo again. "I flagged your findings. Pushed for internal audits. I thought if I stepped aside, maybe someone else would pick it up." "And they brought in Trent," I said flatly. Gerald nodded. "To clean up," I added. "To bury what you left behind." Trent wasn't just a replacement, he confirmed. He was a transition agent. "And Brian?" He gave a bitter smile. "Their hatchet man. Even back then." My fingers curled around my coffee cup until the ceramic creaked. "Why now?" I asked. "Why meet me?" Gerald reached for one final document. A letter. Not to the board. Not to the SEC. To me. Dated 6 months ago. Never sent. On it, in his familiar scrawl, were the words: "If I fall, I hope someone continues what I couldn't finish." I read it twice. The handwriting was shaky. Some lines crossed out, rewritten. But the message was clear. He hadn't surrendered. He'd prepared a handoff. I looked at him, the man who once guided my every professional step, now deflated across from me like a broken relic. "You could have warned me," I said. You were already in their sights, he said. And if I told you, they'd have buried you then, not now. I left the cafe with a storm in my chest. Gerald wasn't innocent. But he wasn't the architect either. He was the first to see the fire, and he tried to whisper, "Run," before they set the building ablaze. Later that evening, Alex called again. I filled him in. He was silent for a moment, then said, "It tracks." "They're not just boosting earnings," I said. "They're cooking the books to spike the valuation ahead of a sell-off." "Yes," Alex said. I found mention of a Project Equinox, a confidential initiative between the board and a private equity firm based out of Boston. Final stage discussions. If the numbers hold, they sell next quarter. If not, the deal collapses. So they inflate Q3, I said, drop the news, watch the stock soar, and cash out before the truth catches up. And everyone else? Left holding the grenade. A long pause. "This goes beyond accounting fraud," Alex said. "It's coordinated securities manipulation. If the sale goes through under false pretenses, thousands of people, investors, employees, get crushed." I felt the rage build slowly. Cold. Dense. They'd turned a company I helped build into a scam in a blazer. And they were willing to destroy lives for it. I looked at my safe. Inside were the drives. Every version of every doctored file. Every unauthorized access log. Every message. And now. Gerald Moore's confession. The first handoff. The first thread. The fuse was lit. They wanted the numbers to lie. I was about to make them scream. Everything after that cafe meeting with Gerald felt like a countdown. Not just in my head, on every clock, in every email timestamp, in every line item I re-verified on the audit trail. The pieces were set. And for the first time since Trent Holloway swaggered through the lobby with his corporate grin and East Coast ego, I wasn't reacting. I was in control. Alex wasted no time. With Gerald's written statement and my archive of digital evidence, he assembled a task force at the SEC. A special investigations unit was formed, operating under the radar with a clear directive: catch DeltaStride in the act of filing knowingly fraudulent financials. The beauty of it? They weren't going to stop the crime. They were going to let it happen. And then crush them mid-stride. By Friday, the stage was set. Alex was relentless, coordinating with federal prosecutors, forensic techs, and internal compliance officers like a conductor preparing for the symphony's final crescendo. Meanwhile, I kept quiet. I didn't contact Miles. I didn't respond to Chloe's last encrypted message. I didn't even tell Linda the specifics. I couldn't afford leaks. Not now. But I had one ally still inside. Late Friday evening, as I stared at my kitchen wall like it might speak, my burner phone buzzed. Miles. Trent's called an emergency weekend meeting with the senior finance team. He says Q3 has to go out first thing Monday. They're working non-stop. Then another message, 15 minutes later. Susan's here too. It's serious. They're pushing the projections hard, no room for error. Of course they were. They were polishing the lies, turning falsified revenue into a glistening promise just in time for the market. They were walking right into the trap. Sunday night was a storm of nerves and silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I just sat in the dark, watching the seconds tick by as if I could bend time to my will. I double-checked the drives. Triple-checked my encrypted uploads to the SEC's secure vault. Everything was in place. At 6:12 a.m. Monday, I got the first text from Alex. We're live. Stay dark. Be ready. I nodded to no one. The sun hadn't even risen yet. By 8:02 a.m., DeltaStride officially filed their Q3 report with the SEC. It was beautiful. Perfect formatting. Glossy projections. Strategic forecasts of multi-year growth and inflated subscriber metrics. A textbook case of fraud so polished it looked like Wall Street gospel. And they filed it anyway. At 8:45 a.m., all hell broke loose. I wasn't there to see it in person, but I didn't need to be. By 9 o'clock, the building's lobby was swarmed by men and women in dark suits and windbreakers marked SEC and DOJ. By 9:07, trading of DeltaStride stock was halted. By 9:13, Miles sent one final message. They just escorted Trent and the CEO out in cuffs. Cameras everywhere. I found a live stream less than 5 minutes later. And there he was. Trent Holloway, looking less like a Wall Street visionary and more like a coked-up weasel in a $3,000 suit, being led out with zip ties around his wrists and a shell-shocked CEO trailing beside him. Behind them, two board members, both members of the compensation committee, following in silence, faces pale and damp. The press was already there. I saw flashes. Microphones shoved forward. Reporters shouting. Trent, did you falsify financial statements? What about Project Equinox? Was the board complicit in securities fraud? Trent didn't say a word. But his eyes, those smug, calculating eyes, looked like someone had finally shown him a mirror. And he hated what he saw. The SEC's official statement dropped by noon. After thorough investigation and coordination with internal whistleblowers, we have reason to believe that DeltaStride Innovations submitted materially false financial disclosures in order to manipulate stock value ahead of a planned acquisition. The fraudulent activity includes backdating contracts, falsifying revenue recognition, and misleading forward guidance to investors. They listed names, charges, potential sentencing guidelines. And then, in the closing paragraph, we would like to acknowledge the cooperation of several key witnesses, including former CFO Gerald Moore and former Senior Finance Officer Martin Hale, whose documentation and testimony were critical in uncovering the full scope of the scheme. I stared at the words on my screen for a long time. Not vindication. Not pride. Just stillness. They tried to erase me. And now I was the footnote in their ruin. But even as the dust began to settle, the victory felt incomplete. A day later, I was stopped on the street by a man I didn't know. Middle-aged. Sharp suit. Firm handshake. "You're Martin Hale?" he asked. I nodded. "I lost 60 grand on DeltaStride before the halt," he said. "But you did the right thing. Thank you." He walked away without another word. Later, I got a voicemail from Chloe. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "They're trying to pin the forecasts on Brian. But there are audit trail backups they don't know exist. I saved copies before they cut me out. You were right. They were lying. All of them." She ended with, "Thank you for not being like them." It hit harder than I expected. A week after the raid, I was invited to a private SEC debriefing at their regional office. Alex led the briefing with the rest of the investigative team. Charts. Timelines. Emails. My documents pinned on every slide. And then came the key moment. A summary of the financial motivations behind the fraud. It all came down to a single phrase: performance contingent stock options. The entire executive suite was promised millions in accelerated equity if the share price exceeded a certain threshold before Q4. It was a pressure cooker of greed, structured to reward deception and punish hesitation. They had gamified corruption. And I'd pulled the plug. Alex closed the session with a quiet nod in my direction. "We don't get many wins like this," he said. "You didn't just stop a fraud, you prevented a market-wide ripple that could have cost lives." I left without a word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew that what mattered had already been said. Through the numbers. Through the silence. Through the handcuffs clicking shut on men who thought they were untouchable. 2 days later, a letter arrived by certified mail. Delta Stride's interim CEO. It read: "We offer our sincere apologies for the wrongful termination and defamation you experienced under the previous executive regime. The board acknowledges your contributions and integrity, and we would welcome a conversation about your potential return in a senior oversight role." I stared at the letter for a moment before sliding it into the shredder. Some bridges burn. The offer sat shredded in my trash bin for less than a minute before Linda reached over and emptied it into the kitchen garbage. "You sure?" she asked, not unkindly. I didn't even look up from the papers in front of me. Dead sure. Because I knew what that email really was. Not redemption. Not justice. It was a rebranding opportunity. A way for Delta Stride's board to say, "Look, the whistleblower came back. See? We've changed." But I didn't want to change the company anymore. I wanted to change the system that let it happen in the first place. So I started something new. Hale Ethics and Forensic Advisory. Not the flashiest name, but it said what it needed to. We weren't just compliance consultants. We were the ones you called when the walls were shaking and someone was quietly turning off the alarms. Within the first month, I was speaking to internal audit teams in 3 different states. Within 2, I was invited to guest lecture at a law school in Seattle. By the 3rd, I had back-to-back meetings with general counsels at Fortune 500 companies wanting to know how to build a culture that didn't punish truth. The irony? Everywhere I went, people called me brave. But I didn't feel brave. I felt necessary. A cool wind followed me into the SEC building one November afternoon, where I met Jennifer Klein, one of the lead investigators who had worked beside Alex throughout the Delta Stride case. She greeted me with a slight nod, her eyes as unreadable as ever. "Still turning heads out there?" she asked. "Trying," I said. We walked the hallway in silence for a moment before she said, almost casually, "You know Moore started this, right?" I looked over. She wasn't smirking. Wasn't trying to downplay anything. Just stating fact. "He filed the first report," she continued. "Buried in a wave of noise, yes, but it was there. You picked up the thread he couldn't hold on to." I thought back to the coffee house. To Gerald's hand sliding that letter across the table. "If I fall, I hope someone continues what I couldn't finish." "He opened the door," I said softly. "I walked through it." She gave a small nod. "You ended what he couldn't." And with that, she turned and left me in the lobby, where the floors echoed too loudly for the weight of the moment. Some victories come loud, with handcuffs, headlines, and lawsuits. Others are quiet. Private. A few weeks later, I was sitting in a small coffee shop on Alberta Street, my usual place. The kind of local joint where they misspell your name but always remember your order. I had a folder open on the table, filled with handwritten notes from a corporate ethics workshop I was building out. The late autumn sun flickered through the window, and everything felt steady. Then I noticed him. Across the room. Sitting alone. A man in a dark coat, mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, eyes just a little too focused on me. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't even obvious. He just sat there, hands around a coffee cup, watching. When I finally met his gaze, he did something simple. He nodded. Not big. Not theatrical. Just a slow, respectful dip of the head. And then he stood, placed a $5 bill under his cup, and walked out without another glance. I didn't follow. Didn't need to. I stayed at that table for a while. Not out of paranoia, just presence. Because I understood something now. Telling the truth doesn't make you safe. It doesn't always make you right. It makes you visible. And that visibility? It has a weight. A price. One you carry long after the headlines fade. But I carried it gladly. Because when they tried to erase me, I had something stronger than silence. Something they couldn't buy, couldn't bury, couldn't outspin. I had proof. And the will to use it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I'd do it again. And I don't give them a clean answer. Because that's not how this works. It cost me years. Relationships. Comfort. But it gave me clarity. And in a world where truth is just another item in someone's PR budget, clarity is power. Integrity isn't a personality trait, it's a decision. One you make when it's hard, when it's costly, when no one's watching. In a world where loyalty is up for sale, the one person who can't be bought becomes the most dangerous person in the room.